The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, Earth Day Every Day, Creating a Green Culture in Your Congregation. My name is Sophie Golomb, and I am the Legislative Assistant at the Religious Action Center who works on issues related to the environment and food justice. And we thank you so much for joining our webinar today. I'm pleased to introduce our webinar panelists, Rabbi Devorah Lynn, Rabbi Michael Bernholtz, Rabbi Shoshana Conover, and Stacy Keneally. Today's webinar is meant to delve into how congregations can foster a culture of environmentalism that goes beyond just independent greening initiatives. So many of our congregations already are taking actions to reduce our carbon footprints. But if these actions are not necessarily consistent with our synagogue's other practices or expressed as uniquely important to our stewardship of the planet as Jews, then they don't have the same sort of impact. So while we have recycling programs, these can serve as a catalyst for future greening projects, or as a tool for talking about our stewardship to the planet, or responsibility as Jews to the environment. And then can further, spur advocacy efforts or other broader environmental stewardship. And they can also inspire what people are doing in their homes. So some of the rabbis on this call today will talk about the successes of their synagogues in modeling environmental behavior and shaping attitudes towards the environment, therefore building a culture of environmentalism. There will also be a Q&A at the end of this webinar, and that'll be an opportunity for all the participants on the call to answer or to ask any questions that they want answered by our panelists. And if you'll see on the sidebar, there is a box where you can type in your question, and I will actually read it aloud during the Q&A and have our panelists answer. But to kick off our discussion, we're going to start with a text study by Rabbi Devorah Lynn. So take it away.
Thank you very much, Sophie. You can hear me okay, right?
Yes.
Good. I know we have all heard once or twice, or maybe even more than 3 times, texts from Bereshit and the Garden of Eden story, or a text on the concept of rest on Shabbat, or that very radical idea of a sabbatical year, to illustrate our obligation to stewardship, to guard, and to care for the earth, rather than to dominate it. The much-told midrash from Ecclesiastes, Kohelet Rabbah, where God says, "Don't muck it up. Don't muck up my earth. For if you do, there will be no one to set it right after you." We get that. It's a weighty responsibility. So I was looking for something different for this Earth Week, a text that spoke to me in a different, more urgent way. And I found it a few weeks ago in the Parshiot, the Torah portions we love to hate, the bane of the B'nai Mitzvah, Tazria, and Mitzorah. These are the portions that describe in intimate details more than we want to know. The laws pertaining to childbirth, menstruation, skin affliction, and house mold. I want to focus on the last 2, skin and house ailments. If we look at the first text of Leviticus 13:45, it reads, "As for," can you put that second thing? "As for the person with a scaly outbreak," here's another translation, "the clothes shall be rent, the hair on the head disheveled, and the upper lip be covered over, as if the person is in mourning. And that person shall call out, Tameh, Tameh, unclean, impure." Sometimes it is translated polluted. When that was read out loud during the Torah service, I suddenly heard the earth, with all its scaly, itchy, swollen, inflamed, infected, waterlogged, dry, chafing skin, crying out for help. It's not like we haven't heard the planet wailing. In fact, she has been crying out from super polluted sites, long-term droughts, harsher, more frequent floods, unusual weather, shifted seasons, retreating plants, and stranded polar bears. We are assaulted by news stories, documentaries, white papers, We notice them, but we turn aside. We avert our eyes unless it happens to be us. And it seems we're spending less time with Mother Nature. Fear of deer ticks and other insects, distracted by too much work and electronic tools and toys, we partake of less fresh air than before. A book with the title The Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. Nature Deficit Disorder? It resonates all too well. Perhaps we think if we stay away, we won't catch whatever is bugging Mother Nature. More time inside could mean we are noticing less the subtle cues and even the larger ones of smell and taste, touch and sight and hearing that are shouting at us from our natural environment. Tameh, tameh, I'm hurting. Mudslides, species encroachment, fewer birds. Losing touch with nature can harden our heart, just like the Pharaoh in our Exodus story from last week. And like the plagues that struck the Egyptians, those 10 miracles were not unnatural things. It was only that they got completely out of hand. Blood is life for us, but not in our water system. Darkness is essential every 24 hours, but not so deep and long you can touch it. Death is a part of life, but unnatural against our children. And so too it is with carbon dioxide that we all learned about in 3rd grade. The stuff of photosynthesis, it's out of kilter. We were all taught we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide, and the plants breathe in carbon dioxide and send out oxygen just for us. It's a perfect system, such a perfect balance. What's happened? It's gotten out of kilter. It's gotten completely out of hand. It's gone wild, like the skin rashes on those poor folk in our Torah portion, or this house in this text in Mitzorah with mold. There's too much of it, and it's threatening impurity of our global community. How loud does the planet have to cry out, Tameh, Tameh, impure, polluted, before we hear, before we listen, before we're going to act? We can get paralyzed. It's way too big. I get that. I feel like I'm the only one paying attention sometimes. I feel so lonely. But Bill McKibben of 350.org, the web-based activist group that highlights the dangerous level of carbon dioxide, thinks that the planet's immune system is finally kicking in. He means that environmental activism is acting up in almost every nation around the globe, in the places where climate change is already hitting the hardest. Just as scaly skin and moldy walls cannot be ignored, we can no longer meet this issue with inaction, and we must act everywhere and on all fronts. It may be challenging to change from our consumptive habits to ones that are kinder to our home planet. We'll have to experiment with new techniques and new products. Mistakes will be made, decisions questioned, and reassessment will need to be ongoing, just as the Kohen, the priest in our Torah text, re-examined again and again the mildewed house and the scaly skin until the problem was resolved. There will be adjustments. Some will be major, some will be difficult, some will be taxing in order to heal from our fragile state. Tonight, we count number 10 of the Omer, the numbering of the 49 days between Pesach and Shavuot. In the mystical way of looking at the Omer, tonight, day 10, pairs the 2 sfirot, the 2 vessels from the tree of life, Tiferet with Gevurah, harmony balanced with restraint. If we can act now, if we can restrain our self-indulgence and appetites, we can live in harmony with our natural world. May this webinar inspire you to rouse your community to cry out for action and healing for our planet now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. And it's really great to hear how environmentalism can be relevant to many of the texts in our Jewish tradition. And as you mentioned, we often talk about the same sort of texts that refer to this, but in any sort of situation where where you can make the Torah portion of the week or whatever portion you choose relevant, there's a lot of opportunities for that in our synagogues, and speaking about this from a Jewish perspective. I now am going to invite Rabbi Shoshana Conover to speak a little bit about her experience in fostering environmentalism in her synagogue and really shaping attitudes towards green culture and what that actually looks like in practice.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much to Rabbi Lynn for such an exquisite of our Torah. And I also want to acknowledge how wonderful it is to be on the phone with Rabbi Bernholz, Michael Bernholz, who shares a mentor with me, who is his father, Rabbi Richard Bernholz. So such an honor to be able to be on this call with him as well. I wanted to let you know that I'm having technical difficulties, so it would be wonderful, Sophie, if you could just cue me into which slide we'll be on, so that way I can speak in some kind of a coherent way about the slides. I'll say that if we can bring up that first one, where it talks about our visionary, Karen Lewis. She is the person behind really getting our environmental piece of greening our synagogue up and running in the temple. This was something that we really wanted. I think that there was a real want for this for a very long time, that we would find ways to green the synagogue. But it wasn't until Karen really stepped up and said, I'm here, Hineni, I'm here, I'm ready to really get this into here. Karen has so many of the skills that I think it's important for any time you're wanting to really start a project like this, so comprehensive as, can we green everything that we do in the synagogue? Can we make it much more environmentally friendly? Every aspect of the synagogue. You need someone, or really probably a small group, that can be what Karen embodies in just one person. It's passion, organization, knowledge of both the synagogue and the larger community, and then the ability to network and build relationships with others. And then what Karen has in spades, thank God, is persistence. And so that way, when you have that going in, it's much easier to make the rest of the things happen. And this slide is actually a picture from her on a radio talk show with Hank Saunders from Faith and Place, and they're talking about religion and the environment. And this is, again, this is something where Karen has put so much heart and soul into this, and it's made everything so much easier in our congregation, which was already a very natural fit. So I want to say that what we did, what Karen was able to do, was to apply for a grant through Green Space. And now you can pull up that second slide, which really, it was in partnership with the RAC that we were able to, as a congregation, get a grant to be able to put these things in place. And really what they wanted to see is that we would do this in a spiritual way, that we would make sure that our services, our prayer experiences, our various spiritual experiences at the synagogue would be infused with the environment, that we would definitely do a piece that would be very much about educating in all aspects of the synagogue. So we have lifelong learning here. So from the kids who are in Gan Shalom, which is our preschool, all the way through to people who are in their 90s and actually hundreds are able to be learning about the environment. So that's another aspect that was really important. Another piece is that we make sure that this is not just in our synagogue, but that actually we partner with other communities of faith in doing things around the environment, as well as advocacy, making sure that it's not just through our service kinds of actions and the smaller actions that we take, but advocating in a larger sense to be able to make sure that environmental policies are put in place that really can sustain us. So then if we can go to the next slide, what was wonderful is that Karen, as well as some others, were able to help to get us this grant. We have loved being part of Green Space, and we've loved our partnerships with others who are also part of Green Space. And of course, we've loved the resources that the RAC has given to us, so that we were really able to get this up and running really starting in the spring of last year, so about a year ago, where we have every year a day in which we learn about a topic as a congregation, and then we go and depend upon the city of Chicago to really act on the stuff that we've learned. And so last year, we really had this day called Golomb was a day of really learning about the environment. So we started off with a panel discussion. And the people who were on the panel, Robert Neville, you might have heard of before, because he's somebody who at KM Isaiah Israel on the south side of Chicago, he was able to do a community garden at their synagogue and then been able to train others on the south side to have community gardens in all different kinds of places. He's extraordinary, and he was essential in helping us to create. We wanted to have a community garden in our east lawn of the synagogue. Unfortunately, it didn't get enough sunlight, so we made a beautiful butterfly garden there. Again, Robert was essential for us in learning how to do that. We also had Bruce Retaine from Environment Illinois to really talk about advocacy and how we could get involved with that. Marty Levine, who was then the executive director of Chicago JCC, who nurtured a project called the Dawn Project, in which Jews were able then to go out and really work in the field of suburban Chicago. And so with all of them talking about this, it was wonderful, so that then we could go and do some projects in the city, two of which, one was to be able to do an Adopt Beach cleanup, and the other was to be able to plant Gan Emunah, our garden of faith. That's our garden, that's the butterfly garden, in the front of our synagogue that was created in memory of Faith Drummer. And so that really kicked off for our community, our beginning of really doing everything intentionally with greening our congregation. If we go to the next slide, then you see that one of the things that we were able to do was do comprehensive recycling. So our recycling program was really hit and miss, and it was mainly just paper. And so we really wanted to be able to do recycling all through the synagogue, and in a very intensive way. And so Greg Shannon, I love this story. Greg was a new member of the synagogue. There was something on our e-glass that had some info, but if you want to get more information, contact, and he thought it said to contact Karen Lewis. It was actually his supposed to contact Jason Lindner. When they got on the phone, then Karen really reached out to him, told him all about Eco Kabbalah, which is our greening effort. That's what we call our greening effort. He then got very, very involved, and he was instrumental in helping us with this, with our recycling program. He really helped with getting in charge of those graphics. Then they all did these trainings with every piece of the congregation to be able to then, at the ONIG, be able to know what can you recycle and what can you and then what can you put in the trash. We have all of the ware. Let's see, at this point, it's all compostable ware. So meaning we have papers that are compostable, forks, knives, cups, everything that we use at the synagogue now that's disposable is all compostable. If we go to the next slide, I'm hoping that that's the slide that's on our 20s and 30s Sukkot. Is that correct?
Yes.
If Sophie, do you just want to chime in? I hope that's correct. If not, then hopefully you'll go to that slide.
Yes, it's 20s and 30s.
Thank you. So part of what we've done is we've wanted to partner with every single group within the congregation to make this really take root in the congregation. So we kicked that off with our 20s and 30s, who were very much like, this is so in keeping with their values. So we did that with a Sukkot extravaganza, where what we did is we had a cabin at 40 people. We had a vegetarian potluck dinner. And then we had a chef come in and talk about making healthy choices and green choices with the types of ways that we both buy our food and cook. And so that was wonderful. And we also had lots of local beers and talked a little bit about how making local choices help with what we did. The other thing that was wonderful is Esther Bowen, who is an amazing person who's part of our group, who actually went last year to be able to learn from the RAC on how to be an even better advocate on all different kinds of social justice issues. She went there with her husband, Aaron Midler. She actually helped come up with different kinds of mixer questions on the tables. And so then we were able to have these really great discussions around the table and bond, have wonderful food and great beer, and it was a really wonderful way to celebrate Sukkot and our attachment to the environment. If we go to the next slide, can you let me know as far as what that next slide is?
It says mishpacha.
Okay, so Mishpacha is our general program for parents with young children. And so what we have is all of these different programs for families with young children. And so I wanted to highlight some of the things that we do, that we've done with this group, with having Eco Chavurah really help them with how to have an environmental focus. One is we did 2 different Adopt a Beach events where we went. We had some spiritual teachings. We had some great picnic lunches, and then we went and we cleaned up the beach, and we also took water samples. Another thing that we were able to do, or that we're going to do this summer, is we're going to go to a place called Starved Rock, where we're going to have a really fun scavenger hunt around the environment, but also infused with different Jewish teachings. And just a really fun day, but also giving them that piece of our tradition and an environmental awareness. And then the other piece that we did, which was really fun, was we did a Tot Shabbat, where it was infused with great environmental songs. And we also had a story that had a green theme. I know it looks in the picture like I'm just scaring children, but I was actually trying to tell them a very animated story about the environment. And they also had a chance to plant herbs. Something that I love about what they're doing is that this Olam HaMitzvot, so that's coming up this Sunday, our kids from so both the TAF and also other families from Mishpacha, they're actually going to be helping to plant in the garden, which includes planting herbs that then are going to be used at the soup kitchen and all of our recipes at the soup kitchen that we have every Monday night. Now, if we go to the next slide, this is what we're doing with our high school students. So one was that they actually went to a neighborhood called Pilsen, and they learned much more about environmental racism and the notion of what happens in different communities within Chicago, and how sometimes the environments in those neighborhoods are not what they need to be. They're not safe to be able to plant, and you can't do community gardens because there's too much lead in the soil. And so how do we actually do things in order to advocate for better environments in different neighborhoods? So they had a tour of that neighborhood. They also learned a lot more about the environment, how it affects that neighborhood. And then also one of our high school students joined others going to Springfield to lobby Congress on various environmental issues, and they went there with Faith in Place as well, which was wonderful. And so we also had taught a class on the environment and Judaism at the high school level. The next slide shows both what we're doing in the congregation that we had with the sisterhood. We had a women's seder. It was a vegetarian meal. There was a lot raising awareness for the environment. And then on the other side, you see how we're so involved in the Chicago Jewish community. Some of those pictures that you'll see, one is that we have a Shabbaton with BJBE, another Green Faith congregation. We also hosted a movie called Food Patriots, and we talked. We had so many people in our congregation then who were not from our congregation, but we hosted it. It was the national premiere, and we had many people there learning about how to make healthy food choices through watching that movie and then a discussion afterwards. And then the other thing that you'll see is that there's a bike rack, and that was donated by the city to be able to raise awareness around alternate bike choices, or alternate transportation choices. We're also going to have a biking Shabbat in May to be able to, again, raise awareness for other modes of transportation. And then finally, what you'll see there are Aaron Midler with Esther Bowen, as well as Elaine Roth, when we were hosting a winter farmers market at our synagogue. We did that in partnership with United Methodist Church, and so it was really wonderful the ways that we're partnering and being able to see that what we can do best is live by our environmental values, but don't stop there, invite others, and create more partnerships create more power in order to allow others to make those same kinds of choices. So it's been really such an honor to be able to be part of this, and again, led beautifully by Karen Lewis and her leadership skills, and then to be able to be partnering with so many others. It's been really such a gift to our congregation and so very important. And so with that, I'll turn it over to the next person.
Sorry, I thought I was not on mute.
Hi.
Oh, yes, Rabbi Bernholtz, if you want to take it away.
So I'm Rabbi Michael Bernholtz. I am the rabbi at Temple Beth Shalom, and I'm in Vero Beach, Florida. So I am an hour north of the Palm Beaches and an hour and a half south of Orlando. So I'm kind of the middle of nowhere between all of the Jewish somewheres. I have a small congregation. We have about just over 200 families, and we're the only congregation in our county. And so we're in a smaller community, so it's a different paradigm than in some of the other places. And the way that we're approaching our green efforts is actually through a congregation and biblical garden. It started out as being an experiment on my behalf to see if we could plant the 7 species of Israel and the 4 species of Sukkot, and we started to have success like that, and it just kind of kept growing out from there. So what I'm going to be doing is doing a presentation on a couple of the different activities I've done in the last few months, and what has happened is this year we've made a concerted effort that I am doing 2 sessions with each of our religious school classes on a Sunday morning. They come out to different parts of the garden, each class for an hour, and I've been able to do different kinds of lessons and programs with them. As you can hear, it says that with some wheat we live out Torah. There's a line in Pirkei Avot, in Wisdom of Our Sages, that without ein kemach, ein Torah, ein kemach, without flour, without sustenance, you can't appreciate Torah, and without values of Torah, that all the food in the world wouldn't really sustain you. And so I have 2 different lessons that are coming from 2 different places, and we can go to the next slide. This is a book that we found. It's The Little Red Hen and the Passover Matzah. And it has the story of the little red hen that she found some wheat and she was going to grow the wheat. And instead of bread, of course, it's growing Passover matzah and ends with the whole Seder. And what I loved about this lesson and this experience is that I started with a Jewish text, and then I led the kids, was working with a group of 3rd and 4th graders. I led them out into the garden. So here was just a very simple recipe for matzah, and we can go to the next slide. And where I led them was into our wheat fields. This is actually our wheat field from last year. And when I say field, it's big quotation marks, because you can see these are just small 1x3 garden boxes. And we've got a little bit of a larger, if you go to the next slide. This is some of the heads of the wheat, and one more slide. You can see we just actually have a flower bed that we pulled I had a garden day in the fall, and everybody helped pull the bushes and the weeds and the other stuff, and we replanted it with wheat. It didn't take a huge amount of area. My main goal with this activity was just to give our students, these 3rd and 4th graders, just a whole taste of the experience of going from wheat seed to being able to have the bread, just like the little red hen does. So here you can see it's not a huge space. It didn't take a whole lot of wheat. And what I did that morning with those students is we planted a little bit of wheat. I just had a small pot that I planted some wheat in. And then I was able to go, and we were doing this on the deck at our synagogue, and I was able to show them this wheat growing. So you can really see that there are wheat heads that have now appeared. We've actually had some problems with squirrels and some birds, but we have wheat growing at our congregation. And this was an idea that I had actually gotten from a community in Portland, Maine, that was had a whole wheat growing and bread making. So I was able to take this on and do it at our congregation. We can go to the next slide. And this is my son Nathaniel, who was helping me but you can see in the pan is some of the cut wheat. And what my son is doing there is actually just breaking it up. He's threshing and winnowing it. And when he was able to break it apart, we actually just blew through it. We breathed on it like you're blowing out a birthday candle. And wouldn't you know, the shaft goes one way and the seeds stay on the bottom. And you were able to actually really experiencing separating the wheat from the chaff, which plays into all kinds of different biblical stories. And then you can go to the next slide. And there are some of the wheat, grains of wheat and barley that actually fell down to the bottom. And then the next slide. And I had gotten a 5-pound package of wheat seed, and so I was able to do some of this in real time, and some of it was cheating because I had the wheat seed already. But here's my son, and he just has a rock in his hand and a little piece of a concrete paver, and he's actually even smiling, and you can see him also working very intently. And this is what I did with those students as 3rd and 4th graders. My son's actually is only 8 years old. He's in 2nd grade, but this was the same thing I had done that morning. And we just took a rock and we just ground some of the wheat up into flour so they could see it. And if you go to the next slide, you can actually see the students were able to see that they were actually making the same kind of flour that they would then be able to buy in the bags in the store. But they could see us going through this whole process of having the wheat seed, sowing the seed, being able to see the seed grow into plants, seeing that you cut it, you had to separate it, and now we were grinding it. And then we were able to go back inside. They couldn't use this wheat because I didn't have an opportunity to really sterilize the surface that they were doing the grinding on, and so I was trying to be careful with that. But they could at least see the process, to be able to go and see it going from wheat seed all the way to flour. We then went inside, as we were reading the story of the little red hen and the Passover matzah. We were able to take flour and water and a little bit of oil, and they were each able to make one little piece of matzah themselves. So in the course of this whole hour, we were able to read this book. We were able to go through all the processes of growing wheat and then actually make something that they were able to eat at the end. So they were able to see this one story and the values of the little red hen and inviting all of her friends for the Passover Seder, and that at the same time they were able to be out in the garden and being able to see that the food doesn't just show up at their Passover table, that there's a whole process of planting and caring for and processing the food in order then to be able to eat it and to enjoy it. So it was just a very 1-hour lesson that they were able to see both sides of that. They started with a Passover story, and we were able to take it out into the garden. And so we're going to go on to the second lesson. And this one's a little more esoteric. It was definitely one that I did with older students. I did it with some of our 5th graders. And this was using the garden to be able to get back into a concept of Jewish ideas or Jewish values. So what you see here is kind of an image of Jewish time. That on the left you have the past, the Garden of Eden, that it's a place of perfection and balance, that Adam and Eve were living in a state of shalom, of wholeness, completeness, and peace in the Garden of Eden. And that at the other end of Jewish time we have the future, Olam Haba, the world to come, and it's supposed to be a reflection. That was my cheesy graphic there. The Olam Haba, the world to come, is really a reflection of the Garden of Eden. That we want to create the Garden of Eden, once again, that place where we're in harmony with nature, where we're in harmony with each other, that we are able to understand the balance of all of the cycles of water and sunlight and food. In the middle is Olam Hazeh, is the present, and that we feel that past and future, always circling around us. And so I started with teaching this idea that there is this bubble of Jewish time with the past and the future, and here we are in the middle trying to bring those two pieces together. And then we're going to go to the next slide. And this was another kind of concept I brought into them, talking about that sense of Olam Haba. They had been talking about afterlife in their 5th grade class a little bit, and so I had been talking to the teacher, and she had asked if I could do something on afterlife, and this was the part of the lesson. This is a little excerpt from Dara Horn's book, The World to Come. And in it, there's a conversation about that concept of the afterlife. And one of the characters says, I believe that when people die, They go to the same place as all the people who have yet to be born. So that's that idea of past and future tied together. And that's why it's called the world to come, because that's where they make new souls for the future. And the reward when good people die. Her mother, that's the character, swallowed and paused. The reward when good people die is that they get to help make the people in their families who have yet to be born. They pick out what kinds of traits they want the new people to have. They give them all the raw materials of their souls, like their talents and their brains and their potential. Of course, it's up to the new ones once they're born what they'll use and what they won't, but that's what everyone who dies is doing, I think. They get to decide what kind of people the new ones might be able to come. So I had this when we started talking about some of the different Jewish views of afterlife and that idea of what does it mean to bring those values of Eden or the values of the past or the connection of our ancestors to bring them into our present to make the world a better place in the future. We're going to go to the next slide. Is another similar quote from a book called Does the Soul Survive? We don't have to look at it right now. We can go to the next one. And so what I did was I started playing with fruit. And when my wife asked my daughter who was in the class what she had studied today, and her comment was, "Daddy mutilated fruit." And so we got to laugh about that. But what you see there is a cantaloupe, and we used a cantaloupe for this. And the cantaloupe, here we're on the outside, and we're looking at past and present and future. Usually we talk about Jewish time being a bubble with the past on one side and the future, and we're in the middle. Well, here we're on the outside, and we have the seeds and the fruit, and all of that potential is in the middle. So my hope was by opening up the fruit and experimenting with the different parts, we would get a chance to unpack that Jewish bubble of time a little bit. So we can go to the next slide. And so my son and I, we cut open the melon. I did this with the class. These are just pictures that I did with my son after the fact so I could illustrate it for you today. And so here you see on the left is my son scooping out some of the seeds into a container. There I am carefully cutting it. And it doesn't take a lot of time or a lot of space or a lot of materials to really be able to create the sense of how do you use the garden in this case, or the fruit, to be able to teach that value of Torah. So we were opening up a rift in the space-time continuum, and you can go to the next slide. And there's, at the top left is the seeds we collected. At the right is me actually eating the fruit. The whole class got a chance to eat the melon. My daughter does not like fruit, and so that's where she was not appreciating this lesson quite as much. Her classmates were all clamoring. They were very excited to eat the melon. And then on the left bottom, you see there is a bowl where we were collecting the rind. So we had the present, the fruit to eat. We had the seeds, which are the future, and we had the rind, the compost. And so we can go to the next slide. And my son and I then, we did this with the class as well. You can take toilet paper rolls, and you kind of cut them up and fold them, and you make little peat pots. And so I make germination stations. And so there we were, just folding the little pots that we had from recycled toilet paper and paper towel rolls, and filled them with soil, and then we were putting in the seeds. And we can go to the next slide. And we just line them up and set them. The beauty of these peat pots in the bin is that you put water into the bin and then they soak it up. It really is a neat way of irrigating, so you're not pouring water all over these new plants and having them fall over. And it just makes a really neat contained place, and I actually can have them inside and we can see them begin to germinate. And then the next slide. And then here's my son. We then took the rind and we went out to a compost bin that we actually have out in our garden, and we put the compost in. And that's actually where it started into a really interesting conversation with the fifth graders, and it started an interesting conversation with my son as we started really talking about, here we're composting, and the compost then becomes the soil for the next generation as well. And so we talked about the genes being in the seeds, and the seeds coming from the fruit, and so it was the past and the present and the future all linking up. And they really, by being able to see each of those different places in real time, with planting the seeds, with composting the rind, with eating the fruit, we got into this amazing conversation of Jewish time about what we got from our ancestors, about what we pass on to the next generation. And so it was bringing the garden into the classroom and the classroom out into the garden. And what I've found is with each of these different experiments, and I actually just experienced that earlier a little while ago with one of our other students who was coming in, when they know that there's a garden, suddenly they start looking at the world a little bit differently. We've had students, as soon as I've taken them and seen our 5 senses gardens, I've walked out the door and there they are smelling some of the herbs or eating some of the nasturtium flowers. So once they do these activities with me as a class, suddenly they're starting to look at our campus and they go and take their parents to explore the garden, or they'll go over with their friends, or they'll go and be able to look on their own. So the more I do it with an organized class, the more times I see them all go out and start to look for different things that they've planted or look for things that they've cared for, and it's been able to expand the awareness of all of the different folks in our congregation and our community, with the kids showing the adults and the adults showing our students. So I hope you'll take some of those different ideas, and as you can see, it's not really huge amounts of space in order to be able to create these experiments and these experiences that let them get into the garden and bring the garden into the classroom.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Rabbi Bernholtz, and thank you, Rabbi Conover, as well, for those 2 presentations. It's really great to hear kind of this, on both ends, this approach in trying to reach every area of the synagogue and doing stuff with youth and other communities, and finding ways of talking about this related to Judaism, as we talked about before, which, there's just so many different ways of applying this knowledge or inspiring environmentalism in this way. And to now transition, I'm going to invite Stacy Keneally, who is a staff member of the Green Faith organization, to talk a little bit about what Green Faith is and her role there, and how this can be another outlet for greening your synagogue. So Stacy, whenever you're ready. Stacy, or do you want to do?
Okay, can you hear me?
There we go. We can hear you.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for your patience. I know sometimes these webinars have quite a bit of trouble. So thank you. It's really good to be with you all today. I'm Stacy Keneally with the organization Green Faith, and I represent and I direct the certification program, which you've heard some about today. And what you might be wondering after hearing from the rabbis about the good work that they're doing at their congregations is how exactly you go about this in your own, and what tools and resources are out there to help you take these steps and to help you transform your congregation in many of the ways that you've heard about. And so I want to take just a few minutes here with you to point you in the direction of some Green Faith resources that can be particularly helpful. So first and foremost, I wanted to provide you my contact information, which you see there on the slide, and also my phone number and the website for the certification program. As you heard from Rabbi Conover and the story of Temple Shalom, the certification program is a really in-depth program to help you green your community from top to bottom. And we have now a total of about 15 Reform synagogues that have gone through the program or are going through the program. And we also have 75 congregations across the country from many different denominations and traditions that are going through the program. So it's a large group, it's a growing group, and it's one where each and every congregation is achieving some of the same results you've seen Rabbi Conover talk about. So it's an exciting program, and I wanted to let you know that if you're interested, you can go to the next slide. It's a program that is well supported. So the type of results that you saw with Rabbi Conover's congregation does not happen overnight, first of all, and it does not happen without a lot of assistance. And so the certification program is a great way to get involved with something that provides you the structure and the resources to really help you achieve that transformation. And there are a lot of ways that we do this that I just want to highlight very briefly here. First, if you participate in the program, we provide you a series of webinars. So similar to the webinar that you're participating in today, we have a number of free webinars through GreenFaith that you receive to walk you and your green team through every step of the certification process. The next piece that I wanted to highlight is that we also have a lot of resources. In fact, we have a special password-protected website for those that take part in the program. And once you join in, you get your login and your password, and you can access the resources in that website. There are over 200 of them, all cataloged for your use. And so it really is sort of a clearinghouse of information for you to find exactly what you need, the exact resource and the exact research you need in order to attain the results that you heard Rabbi Conover describe. We also, thankfully, I love this picture because we also are there for you one-on-one. So it's not just that we give you the resources and the webinars, but we also are there for you by phone anytime you need us. And Rabbi Conover and others can speak to this, particularly the green team leaders can speak to this, because we often get calls and emails and other things from them asking for help, and that's what we're there for. When you're in the certification program, you can receive that help on a consistent basis. No matter what question you have, big or small, we're there to help you. We also, as I just mentioned, can provide you access to email with us. Of course, we're there for the general public in terms of questions, but with certification sites, we're really there for you at any time you need us by email and by phone to assist you in the process of greening. And then finally, you heard Rabbi Conover describe that she's been working with a number of other rabbis and congregations to achieve some of the results that you saw, the farmers market and some other things. That's one big element of the program, is that you get to link up with other congregations doing this work. And we have a Facebook group that we link you into where green team leaders and rabbis and priests and pastors and imams can all connect up together and learn from one another and share stories and questions. And then we can also connect you by phone very directly with those other green team leaders and clergy. So it's a well-supported program and one that you want to consider if you want to green your community from top to bottom. Next slide. I also wanted to quickly mention to you another program, a new program at GreenFaith that may be a good fit for those congregations out there that feel like they want to achieve this shift in culture, but you don't necessarily have the 2 years of the certification program to dedicate to it. Perhaps you're not yet at that point. Or perhaps you want to address one topic at a time. And so a really great way to do that is through something called the GreenFaith Shield. This is a merit badge program for congregations of all faiths. And you can go to the next slide. The way in which the shield works, and you saw from the previous slide, we have 2 shields currently, one on water and one on energy. We will have one on food by the end of this year. And the way that it works is that your congregation takes the steps that you see there. So you dedicate a weekend to that topic, and you do a worship service, you do some educational classes, you distribute some information to your members, and you create an action plan for steps you want to take indoors and out. And GreenFaith provides a lot of help to you to achieve that. We give you sample prayers and texts. We give you lesson plans, best practice fact sheets, all sorts of other things that you see listed there. And in the process, you are able to make very effective changes and have very effective results with not as much input as certification. So you only need to take a month or 2 to complete a shield. And once you complete it, you receive a nice certificate and also an e-logo for your website. So it's a good way to get a lot of good work done in a short period of time and to receive recognition for that. There's more information there in the link at the bottom. And so I just wanted to end with a few pictures of what some sites have done. These 2 pictures are of water shield sites. And we've seen some really interesting work. We've seen a lot of campaigns to get members involved. Here you can see a little boy and his mother hanging up droplets on a tree. And on those droplets, they've written out their commitment to conserve water in their home, and they wrote very specific ways they will do that. And so this was a visible example to the congregation of how to get their members involved. Down there on the right is a church in the program that held an interfaith camp on water. So the church worked with a mosque and also a synagogue to hold a week-long interfaith camp on water, which was really exciting. So a lot of creative stuff is happening through the SHIELD program. And finally, as I mentioned, you receive a beautiful certificate at the end when you graduate the program, and you also receive an e-logo for your website. So if you have interest in the SHIELD, please do visit Green Faith's website. We'd be happy to get you involved.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Stacy. Thanks for giving that information. And really, anyone on this call, if you're interested in learning more about the Green Faith program and all of that it offers, should definitely reach out to Stacy and ask about any questions that you need. Another thing that I just will mention about other resources that are available to you. We have resources on our website. If you go to urj.org/green, you can find program ideas and sample sermons and holiday guides that are all related to greening. If again you want to do kind of an incremental step or sort of a singular experience that can then grow into more of robust culture in your community. And I'd also like to point out an initiative that we have through the Reform Movement called Travel Justly, which is not necessarily a carbon offsetting program, but it's more of a fund that goes towards greening projects as a way of recognizing the amount of carbon emissions that are contributed in the activities associated with conferences or travel that are, tend to be inherently carbon intensive. Flying long distances, staying in hotels, eating out, things like that. And we have a micro grant fund available to any sort of congregations that's interested in doing, solar panels for their congregation's roofs, or breaking ground on a vegetable garden, or any sort of further greening initiative through summer camp or kibbutzim or whatever it is. These are available to you, and you can just contact the manager of Congregational Social Action, Isaac Newell, at the email address on the screen to ask more and to inquire as to what you have to do to apply for those micro grants that's available. So that's a little bit about the resources that we have. In addition to that, if you go to the RAC website, rac.org/environment, you can find a lot of tools in building advocacy, which oftentimes in doing this greening in your synagogue, that can lead to an inclination towards advocacy. And as Shoshana talked about earlier, in her students, going to lobbying on the issues related to the environment in a local level, there's also a lot of opportunities to have a voice in sort of federal legislation or whatever is of importance right now. And on the RAC website, you can find action alerts and different things that are going on, information about the latest in environmental policy and what's happening on a larger scale in activism or in advocacy work. So just to sell that as well, something that should definitely be available to you. So at this time, we will be taking a Q&A with all of the panelists. They'll be available to answer questions that you may have related to any of the topics touched on this webinar. And if you look on the sidebar, there is a box that says questions, and you can just type in your question into that box, and I'll actually read it aloud. And if it's directed at a specific panelist, you can specify that in the question box. But otherwise, I'll just direct it at everyone. And so if you have questions now, please use this time to use that box and ask whatever's on your mind, or advice on how to implement these things in your own congregations. Okay, we have a question here. This is for anyone on the call. The question is, what did you find is the most challenging aspect of implementing greening projects?
I think for us, this is Rabbi Bernholtz, there's very often people say they're interested or say they're excited or say they're tuned in, but once you start doing the invitation and say we're doing a garden project or we're going to do this cleanup, trying to get people actually to come out and give their time and energy is a complicated part of it. Or as I just heard from one of my students who's now joined me, he said the hardest part of it is not getting poison oak.
That's funny. Great. Another question we have is, how do we get adults to see that taking care of the world is a part of Judaism?
This is Stacy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'll answer that briefly. I think that one way to do that was showcased today with starting with a text study or starting with some sort of study or example of how Judaism speaks to this issue, and then leading into the action steps or the secular environmental stuff. We've found in our experience that if you can ground every action step or every hands-on project or anything environmental that you're doing with those sacred texts, with text studies, with prayers and other things, it really helps to, over time, for people to understand that this is really inherent to our tradition.
Great. Thank you. Another question we have is, do you see any behavioral changes in congregations as far as, I'm assuming, as far as what people are doing in their homes? Anybody can speak to that?
I'll jump in quickly, Sophie. This is Stacy again.
Great, thank you.
With Green Faith programs, if you decide to take part in any of them, whether it be certification or the SHIELD program, we actually build in as a requirement that you do outreach to your members and that you get members to take steps at home. So it's actually very integral to the entire set of programming that we offer, and we've found that makes a big difference and that it really is an important part of looking at the overall environmental footprint of your congregation, because of course greening your building is great, but that's only one building. If you can look at all of the homes of your members, that really is where the impact lies.
Great, thank you. Also, Karen Lewis, I've taken you off mute if you want to also speak to some of these questions as well.
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, so the first question was about the challenges in getting people to stay involved and interested in these environmental initiatives. And what it really means is it's constant reinforcement and outreach. You never know who might be interested who wasn't previously. And so it really is building community and continuing to do outreach to the entire temple community. So that's what we've been trying to do at our synagogue. And then with respect to adult education, it really is what Stacy's talking about, where you always match some action that you've done with some type of educational program or messaging, whether it be a weekly e-blast through the temple newsletter or a blog. We have a blog site as well, or an article. Just different ways of trying to reach and speak to the community about what we're doing so it reinforces it.
Great. Thank you, Karen. If anybody else has questions, please feel free to enter them into the question box.
One of the things that I'm hoping to see is we've had the compost bin, and I've been using the compost bin, and we have a couple of members. Instead of having a compost bin at every person's house, we have it here at the synagogue. So one of my hopes was when I did the project with the melons, that other kids and families would start to see that we have a compost bin, and that is something that they could participate and use. So by having the class and having the lesson and introducing the different aspects of the gardens, they're seeing other ways that they can help take care of the earth.
Right, and that's also, creating a kind of sense of ease, because in general composting can be kind of an intimidating thing for people, but if it's right there at the synagogue, it may make it easier for people to be doing that at home, knowing that they have somewhere to bring in. It's not difficult to do.
This is Shoshana. I'm not sure if you can hear me. This is Rabbi Conover.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, I just wanted to say also that for me, I'm a rabbi, I'm a mom, and I'm somebody who's very committed to the environment. And for me, for us to have been engaged in this project that now has become part of our culture, it means that I feel like I'm living in a place I'm working in a place that is completely consistent with my values. And I think for many of our congregants, the more that we're involved in these kinds of things, and again, not getting it lip service, but making sure to integrate it into everything that we do, I think for them, their Judaism comes alive because they so much then see how it inspires all of this as far as our values today about the environment. And so I think my experience is not unique. I think that my experience of taking that deep breath and just being able to let it out and feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so surrounded by a culture alive with my values is really, really important.
Great, yeah, definitely. And just to kind of in response to that, I'm wondering if any of you can speak to if you have found that there has been any pushback in wanting to implement these environmental initiatives into your congregation, if there was any sort of negative feedback from people in your congregation.
It's taken a little bit of time with my congregation to understand why we're doing the garden and how the garden is Jewish and what are the goals of the garden. And the more as I said, I've been doing it, we've had it building up for 2 or 3 years now. This is the first year I've really had the religious school being able to come out and do those learning sessions in the garden. So it was not a normative image for the folks who are in my congregation to think of, even though we have beautiful grounds here at our synagogue, it wasn't normative to think of having a garden, whether it's a pollinator garden or a small patch of vegetables or the wheat. It wasn't part of their paradigm for what a Jewish community does to see that as part of the normal piece of Jewish life, of congregational life.
Well, and I'll also say that for us, we've had almost the opposite experience since we've been working with Green Stage, where a long time ago we tried to make some of these kind of piecemeal environmental improvements in the synagogue, and that then was meeting with more reluctance as far as, especially when there was an economic investment to it, some kind of financial commitment, there was a little bit of pushback. And what's interesting now, as we continue to try to green the synagogue more and more, including an energy audit, which will inevitably lead to more of a capital commitment, that our executive board, along with our larger board, both unanimously endorsed moving forward with this, knowing that there are probably going to be continued financial commitments to it. We couldn't get that kind of energy behind these kinds of things before we actually made it so comprehensive in the congregation. And again, that's thanks largely to Karen Lewis and her vision and commitment.
Great. We also have another question. I know we've spoken about a few different texts that you can use to talk about this, particularly related to gardening or uncleanliness or how to talk about the environment. But for each of the presenters, could you speak to kind of the go-to texts that you would use to support environmentalism?
So this is Rabbi Conover, and this is probably not a very helpful comment. But I would say in just about every parsha, and again, Rabbi Deborah Lynn did this beautifully today, showed us that there is so much in every text that we can take to be able to relate to the environment. We have a stellar one this week, of course, with Leviticus, when we have, the notion of, when we have the holiness code and the notion of, leaving the four corners of the field for those who are most vulnerable in our midst. that, you know, when people say, how can we do that today when we're not as agriculturally based? Well, that's when we start to think about the environment more and making sure that we are doing things to make sure that it stays fit so that there can be green places for people to be able to enjoy and to take from. And as our agricultural kind of perspective dwindles, we need to be able to keep refreshing these texts in order to show that they still have staying power and inspiration.
Thank you. And also, as Karen Lewis has pointed out, you can look on, you know, if you're just looking for text in general, you can find a whole bunch of greening text on the URJ's website under that urj.org/green. Also on the website of the Coalition on the Environment and Jewish Life, that's COJL, C-O-E-J-L. If you look that up, they also have a lot of resources. And also there's an organization called Konfei Nesharim, which also includes a lot of good resources in speaking about the environment and kind of go-to texts.
This is Deborah Lynn. I wanted to say that I agree with Shoshana that almost every text has something in it, but one of my favorite things at Hanukkah time, Arthur Wasco, I think, suggested this, of saying that the one cruise of oil lasted 8 days, and the point of getting our CAFE standards, the miles per gallon standards up, so that a gallon of oil goes so much farther. 8 times as far is just a great metaphor for Hanukkah. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, there's so much to relate to the holidays in particular. It's just such a perfect opportunity to have, you know, a environmental themed holiday at your synagogue for sure. We have another question specifically about the garden programs. Have garden programs led to overall healthier eating in congregations, you know, when it comes to ordering food, or if there's, you know, oneg or simchas or whatever it is?
And we are still at the stage where it's starting to build out. So that really hasn't been part of our program yet. It's been some of the discussion individually with any one class. But I know that certainly they do that at the URJ summer camps, that they all have a lot of different programs on working in the garden and then on eating. And I know that that was one of those, that the idea of taking care of the body and what we take into our body has been, in a lot of the garden programs, I've been talking with a number of the other communities doing that. I know that's been one of their central pieces.
Well, and I'm going to give, this is Rabbi Conover again, I'm going to give further kavod to Robert Neville, who did the amazing project at KM Isaiah, Israel, where he did the community garden. The other piece that happened is that then he went out and he helped other community gardens and then started a program called the White Rock Leading Project, where if there was someone who had been tending a community garden but then was not going to be there during the summertime and they were going to let it just kind of keep producing but not necessarily work it very much, he would help to work that garden. And then other people who worked for organizations who would need more produce could come and glean from those places. And so we, who have the Temple Shalom of Chicago that has a soup kitchen every Sunday, we actually went and we would always, every week in the summer, we had a group of people who would go and glean and bring that back, that produce back for our Monday meal for our soup kitchen. And certainly, of course, then that meant that we were providing for, again, much healthier meals because, like we were providing just organic, fresh vegetables and fruits, many that we wouldn't have had accessible to us otherwise. I can also say that that our kids, especially, so now I have one son now who is still in Gan Shalom in our preschool, and they have had much more involvement in our garden in Gan Emunah. And while it's only herbs that they're growing there, I have to say that at least speaking for my children, they've been so excited about being able to take things that they themselves grow and be able to incorporate that into different things that would be in their food. So I think that we're raising awareness, and in some cases where we actually really are doing that eating healthier because we have these gardens more accessible to us.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this call today, and especially to our panelists who have spoken so wonderfully about different greening projects and the successes in their congregations in building and fostering culture. That, you know, environmental activism is not, it has to be sort of a really integral part of our communities to be effective. And as always, if you have any questions, you can reach out to the RAC, specifically me. I work on environmental issues, as I've mentioned before. My name is Sophie Golomb, and my email is Golomb, my last name, Golomb, @rac.org. And I also can put you in touch with the different panelists on this webinar who can also help answer any questions when it comes to specific greening initiatives. This video will also be available on our YouTube page, so if you know of anybody who wasn't able to attend the webinar today, but you think that this would interest them, that will be available as well. So thank you all so much for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sophie, for organizing this.